Thank you for your patience, everyone. Hello and welcome. I'm Ashley Janke, the Assistant Curator here at Wrightwood 659. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we convene today is the traditional and unceded territory of the Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, Fox, and Fox also called this area home. Thank you all for joining us here this evening in the final weeks of Chryssa, New York. I hope you all had a chance to walk through and see some of the exhibition before you came up here. Our current exhibition is organized by Dia Foundation and the Menil Collection in collaboration with Alphawood Foundation. Wrightwood 659 is an exhibition space dedicated to socially engaged art and architecture and designed by Tadao Ando. Tonight's program expands on our mission through the work of Chryssa, a queer immigrant woman who drew her inspiration from the signs and symbols of the built environment. We're gathered for a special screening and discussion remembering Chryssa's lost monumental sculpture, commissioned for the architecture firm Skidmore, Owings Merrill, who many of you may know as the firm SOM. SOM has also partnered with us for tonight's program, and I want to give a special thank you to Karen Whitty, Francisco Lopez de Arnoza, and Cheyenne Tobias Bramson. Thank you. This project really could not have happened without you, so thank you for all of your hard work and dedication. In 1979, the SOM firm worked with Chryssa to engineer the largest sculpture she would produce in her career for the atrium of the new building at 33 West Monroe Street here in Chicago. Completed in 1980, Chryssa's luminous kinetic work was a towering 6 stories tall and included 900 linear feet of neon. It's a lot. The production of the untitled sculpture was foundational to her practice in the 1980s, through the 90s, leading her to experiment with new materials and find opportunities in the fabrication and collection of her work. Following the opening of 33 West Monroe, Chryssa gave a lecture at the Evanston Arts Center, where she expressed her new fondness for this Midwest city, stating, quote, "I'm grateful to Chicago because it has renewed my enthusiasm and love for America. I'm able to relate to the people with all of you here," end quote. Over the next decade, Chryssa would frequent our Windy City, forming close relationships with local artists, fabricators, hairdressers, and the SOM staff, some of which we will be hearing from today, including Bridget Tomlinson, the senior design studio head and former partner at SOM, David Fleener, project architect and former SOM associate, and Sonia Cooke, who was the former assistant to the monumental architect Bruce Graham, and a later administrative director at the firm. Got it. After the SOM offices moved out of 33 West Monroe, the building was remodeled. Chryssa's monumental sculpture disappeared, and her connection to Chicago was all but forgotten until this exhibition. So without further ado, let's resurrect Chryssa's lost sculpture. All right, and I would like to invite our speakers up to join us for a little conversation. All right, so maybe let's start by each of you introducing yourselves for those of you who didn't catch their names and titles on the screen.
I'm Richard Tomlinson. I was the senior designer for the project and a retired SOM partner.
I'm David Fleener. I'm an architect. I was at Skidmore. I did the working drawings for the sculpture you saw, and I worked on the outfit of her apartment in Soho, and I coordinated with local vendors on some of her sculptures that were made here in Chicago.
I'm Sonia Cooke. I was executive assistant to Bruce Graham, and later on I was administrative director for the SOM Foundation. And I was a friend of Chryssa's by virtue of meeting her through SOM.
Thank you. And so each of you really came to know Chryssa in different capacities. This might be a challenging exercise, but I would like to challenge you to describe Chryssa, each of you to describe Chryssa in one word, just to get a little feel for her.
In one word?
In one word.
Passionate.
It's good. That's good.
Soulful.
Pioneering.
Those are all great words. That really kind of shows the variety of Chryssa and her personality. But to start, so Chryssa, as I mentioned earlier, it really came to Chicago through this project that she completed with Skidmore, Owings Merrill. Richard, can you talk a little bit about how SOM came to begin working with Chryssa, and maybe talk a little bit about your role in that decision?
As the documentary shows, you know, the firm would almost always promote art as part of our projects in one way, shape, or form, whether it was the Picasso or the Monroe, as you saw. And this was a unique time, a unique building that Bruce was trying to create. And the idea of having this lantern was in his mind. And he often would seek the counsel of the Art Institute in the contemporary art section, and you know, talk about what might be appropriate, since this was a different kind of challenge. It wasn't an obvious, well, you know, we're going to get you know, Cholita to do this, or we're going to get Picasso to do that. There was a bit of discussion, and it was suggested that Chryssa might be the person. I mean, she was extremely well known in the 50s and 60s and early 70s as pioneering in minimalism and art, and so you know, we reached out to her, and you know, that's how it all started. And you know, it basically went from there.
And how did Chryssa first react to this opportunity?
Well, I mean, she was, when it came to self-promotion, she was one not to be terribly social and self-promoting. On the other hand, if she saw an opportunity, she was going to go at it. So, you know, I think David and Sonia would both agree with that.
Yeah. Sonia, do you have anything to add to that? Just briefly.
Yes, I mean, she always wanted to embrace something bigger and more complicated, and always felt both vulnerable and strong about the fact, strong in her vision, but vulnerable in that she could not do her artwork without many, many people being involved. And so there was, I almost used the word agonized as my one word, because she was always in angst and agony about how to pull everyone together to realize the vision.
Yeah, so we had a team. David was part of that team. There's another gentleman, Ed Duckett, who was part of that team. And Ed, just for all of your information, Ed was a master tinkerer, and he was responsible for working on the Monroe that is in the loop, and the Calder that has disappeared from the Sears Tower. He was instrumental in that. So his expertise was called upon to help make this thing work. And it was a technical challenge, as the documentary starts to point out. So there was a project team within the project that focused directly on implementing and executing this artwork.
There's another kind of key figure who was important to working with Chryssa, I believe, on this project, Birgitta Peterhans. And I think some of you may have something to say about their friendship and kind of collaboration together, if collaboration is the right word.
As Richard said, SOM entertained many artists for projects, and if the artists came to town by themselves, Birgitta would be assigned to show them around town and entertain them. And so she got to know Chryssa that way. Birgitta wasn't involved in the sculpture itself, but she became very close friends with Chryssa. And I was very close to Birgitta. That's how I got to know Chryssa. Because working on the drawings for the sculpture, I didn't know her. I was just a kid. But then I got to know Chryssa, and then got to become friends with her and to work with the local fabricators on some of her sculptures.
Do you have something to add about Birgitta and why she may have been, as she put it in her oral history, she said that she was in some ways assigned to Chryssa by Bruce Graham. Why do you think that may have been the case?
Well, you know, I have to talk a moment about SOM. So SOM, and of course I come to it from a very passionate spot in my heart, but SOM could be as corporate as it needed to be to satisfy huge clients that really looked for guidance and directions, but part of the mission was also to support artists. And there was an equal passion for that. And there was enough artistry in architecture as there is. You can't separate the two in some ways. That there was let's say, a tolerance for personalities outside of the norm. So I said all that to tell you that both Birgitta and Chryssa were not the norm in that way. So they understood each other, and they respected each other's talents. And I think that SOM was very wise in knowing that Birgitta should be assigned the artists and those individuals who were bigger than life in their visions.
Let me just add a little bit more. Birgitta grew up in a small town in Germany where her father was a pastor at what is called a diaconie, which was a home for people with mental problems. So she grew up, her only friends were people that had mental problems, because it was like a little town where they lived. And so she always had a heart for people that had mental or fiscal problems. And so she might have been assigned to Chryssa by Bruce, but she also felt when Chryssa had problems, and Chryssa did have some mental problems and psychological problems, that Brigida felt very close to her and able to help her when she was down.
Also, what was happening also at the same time, we had the building, we had the sculpture, and then we had the SOM offices, which we were moving from the Inland Steel building to 33 West Monroe. And you can see in some of the photography that there are Chryssa's prints throughout the office. And I was working with Brigida, or maybe it was the other way around, I can't quite recall, on the design of the office. But she worked with Chryssa in curating a series of prints that were throughout the office. So Brigida got involved with Chryssa in that way through the office space itself. So there are quite a few prints.
It seems as though SOM, at least in that period, had maybe perhaps through Bruce Graham and his kind of interest in the collaboration between art and architecture, had a certain interest in incorporating modern contemporary artists into their designs, their facilities, both, as you mentioned, through prints and through artwork, through collection, and also through the incorporation of public art. Can you talk a little bit about where that kind of interest came from?
It was just part of the firm's DNA. I could say that in almost every project that I worked on, there was always a culture of inventing something new and incorporating the best available artistry to support the project, no matter what the budget was. I remember Bruce telling me one time when I was a kid saying, I don't care, this doesn't have to be the John Hancock building. We can invent a new carpet for the elevator cab. We can invent a new this or a new that. It doesn't have to be some master stroke. So there was always this mindset of invention and incorporating art, whether it be a physical artist, a graphic artist. We worked with Massimo Vignelli on some fantastic things, and that ended up being the art. It was just the graphics for the building. So there were a number of dimensions, but there was always this initiative to, at every juncture, try to elevate the art of what we were doing.
And I'd like to add to that we need to keep in mind the times, and that many of the partners that started SOM, quite a few of them, they had left Europe. They had to leave Europe, and they saw a situation there where the art was being suppressed. So they felt in a way that they owed it to humanity, and they spoke that way. Bruce Graham always spoke about civilization and what do we leave for civilization and how do we evolve. And Massimo Vignelli is a good example, an amazing graphic artist. But I remember Bruce Graham decided that Massimo Vignelli was going to do new stationery for him. And it was beautiful, but I had to be taught how to fold it. It didn't fold like a normal stationery. But it was new and it was exciting and it worked.
I'll get back to that because I think that follows into maybe the biggest question of what happens when what we intend to leave behind is destroyed. But first, I want to kind of circle back to Chryssa's sculpture itself, because it seems as though it was quite different than some of the other work that SOM commissioned with artists, namely because it was electric. Can you speak to some of the excitement and also some of the difficulties in the engineering of an electric sculpture, which not only needed to be turned on, but also Chryssa's intention was for it to be on a timer. So some of you who have walked through the exhibition have likely seen some of the sculptures will kind of flash on and off, and that was also part of the intention in some ways of this installation.
The original program was that the light, that would not all be lit at one time, that the light would start at the bottom and go up to the top and then come back down. That only lasted about a week or two.
Well, where Chryssa gets commissioned, so if in looking at the exhibit, you can see her neon sculpture. Well, it wasn't going to be that, so it had to be something else. And she had to interpret that. Bruce said I wanted to feel like a lantern, so she interpreted that into what you see is the finished result, but she wanted it to be dynamic. So as David was saying, she actually choreographed a computer model that would allow it, as she would talk to me about it, she wanted it to feel like it was breathing. So it ended up being a little more mechanical, but she wanted it to breathe within each element and element to element, so that it never appeared the same. It never appeared the same way, and that was all to be controlled by this computer program, which could be changed. I mean, it didn't have to be the same thing, although if it had worked. If it had worked the way it was intended, it probably would have never appeared to be the same way anyhow. And the original intent, which I don't know if it's in the exhibit or not, but she wanted to have the same image on the floor that was in the sculpture. So that same M or W, depending how you look at it, was to be in the floor, but it was to expose the neon itself. So that was the gesture that was to reference the fact that this is neon in there, because otherwise you wouldn't know what's in there. So this was a nod to that, and the owner never wanted that to happen. That was, I think, pushing things a little too far, but then that was to breathe also. So that was to have a life that you could actually see and appreciate. And that never got past the drawing stage, unfortunately, but that would have been fantastic.
Well, Chryssa was certainly known for pushing boundaries throughout her work. But can you talk a little bit about how SOM was able to facilitate something like, a sculpture that was computer programmed? I mean, it was finished in 1980, so it's not like we have all of the AI generated computational power of now. How were you able to incorporate that into the sculpture?
I don't want to sound glib, but you make it happen. You have the vision, and then you figure it out. And that was always the beauty of these things, is they didn't have an answer to start out with. You had to invent the answer. And this project was really a project of constant invention. It was, as the documentary implied, I mean, you didn't want to see the neon, you didn't want to see the structure. The neon created heat. The heat had to be relieved. The thing had to breathe, or it wanted to be able to breathe as a dynamic entity. So you had all these factors. So it was just a cool project, and every day was a new twist and turn about how to make the thing happen.
And I would add that SOM at that time, like you said, that was early in the time of computers. SOM was very dedicated to computers. They had a large staff of computer people. One of the general partners was in charge of the computers. So they had good in-house capabilities for that.
I learned this from one of my site visits to SOM, but didn't SOM also create one of the first CAD software programs?
Yeah.
They had their own drafting program called Draft. And it was very easy to use because it was created by architects for architects. The program we have now called AutoCAD was created by engineers for engineers. And so the SOM had their own language called Draft, which was, in my opinion, much better, easier to use.
Well, at one point we had over 100 computer programmers that were doing nothing but software programming. And as David said, we had our own proprietary system.
And you know, we talk, Ashley, about AI and all of the advances, but I think this shows, as does buildings like the Sears/Willis, how important man's vision and dreams are. And I know that a lot of SOM graduates sometimes speak, and don't forget that the Sears was built with a pencil and paper. And it's just a nod to the human creativity that can make something like that happen and put things together that you naturally don't think of. For example, the Monroe sculpture, it was very important to SOM and to the Art Institute that the model be preserved. So rather than destroy the model to see how it was built, it was sent through an early version of an MRI. So they could preserve the piece of artwork as well as build it in a different scale.
You earlier were talking about what Bruce Graham would often speak about what is left behind. So notably, the reason why we have this program tonight and why we're showing so many images and not video of the sculpture itself and how it exists today is because it was destroyed in the early 2000s, we believe around 2004. What, in your opinion, led to the deterioration and destruction of this work, which was the largest that Chryssa produced in her career? And really, I think one of the reasons why it's the largest that she produced in her career is because of this kind of team of people that the financing and the team that was able to kind of come together and help her solve some of these problems or engineering issues like within the sculpture.
Well, I have a very personal opinion of how that fits into a broader issue. There was a lack of respect, which I said in the video. And I don't think it's a lack of respect just for the work itself, but just a lack of respect about its the civic importance of these contributions that others have made. And the Chryssa is an example of that, where there was no respect for the civic nature of its role in the city, and that somebody actually paid to contribute it. Equally, there was a Tony Smith sculpture at 33 North Dearborn that was destroyed. The Henry Moore at 55 West Madison was removed. The Calder at the Sears Tower has been removed. Bertoia has been modified, I guess is what you would say. I mean, I find this all very disturbing. And the Chryssa is just one example of that in our city. When we started talking about this, Ashley and I started talking about it, I was trying to think of another place that has this lack of concern about the civic nature of the artistic contributions of their city. And I was having trouble finding one. You don't find that in other American cities. And we're losing these one at a time. Who knows what the fate of the Dubuffet is going to be. So anyhow, I have a very personal opinion, and the Chryssa is just one of them. It could have, I did some research a little bit after Ashley and I spoke. I guess there's some article where the owner said it was a safety hazard. I mean, that's a bunch of nonsense. I mean, if you care about something, a building or any object, you care enough about it, you find a way to care for it. And as said in the documentary, I spent some time with the owner, and it could have been well maintained, and it just wasn't.
David and Sonia, do you have anything to add?
Not diplomatically.
Yeah.
Was I diplomatic enough?
Okay, and I know we're getting towards the end of the program, so I do want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. Yes?
So I have two questions. The first is a two-part question, though. Was a consideration of the sculpture to help attract occupants and visitors to the building? Was that in the mindset of bringing this sculpture in and the artist in? And if that was a consideration, was that objective achieved? And the second question, was the building owner involved in any of the decision-making to attract Chryssa in, and did the building owner have any input on the sculpture?
So your couple point question will have a couple point answer. The building was, the owner was 33 West Monroe Associates. 33 West Monroe Associates was made up of some SOM partners, the contractor, Draper and Kramer, who was the building manager, and we were all tenants in the building, along with Arthur Anderson at the time was a major tenant. So, and I think some of their partners were partners in it. So to answer your question, yeah, they were involved in everything about the building. The sculpture wasn't a marketing ploy. The sculpture was like every other sculpture. I mean, think about the Loop at the time. I mean, you had the Picasso, you had the Miro, there's a Louise Nevelson, there was the Tony Smith that's no longer there, there's the Henry Moore that was going in, there's the Calder at the Federal Center. This was seen to be an obligation of any contributor to the fabric of the Loop at the time. This was seen as an obligation. If you were anybody, this is what you did. It wasn't a marketing ploy per se. It was an expectation among the real estate community that this is what's going on. still call it the First National Bank, has the mosaic, so just think about all of it's like a sculpture park at one point in a loop that everybody contributed to.
What do you recall as being the most difficult technical challenge of the fabrication and or installation of the piece, and how did you all surmount that?
Well, it was multi-dimensional. The fabricator was Wrightwood Sign Company. So the fabricator was a sign company. It wasn't some company experienced in doing fine art fabrication. They made signs, but they made neon signs. So, that was a start. And then it was, how to hang it, and then how to ventilate it, and then how to run the wiring through it. I mean, it was like a building. It was like a building challenge. So every aspect of a building, comes into play in having it built, and this was no different. I mean, Ashley said it in the documentary. It's like a building within a building, and it was hanging from the ceiling on these delicate little tubes, and then it had to be cleaned. So there are actually motorized winches that were up in the ceiling that would come down, and we designed a rig in the shape of the sculpture that would get pulled up so that you could wash it and maintain it. And we designed it so you could walk in it and maintain it. So there were a lot of factors that came together, structural and mechanical, and as David was pointing out, early days of computer modeling to model the light program. And I think in the exhibit there's actually sort of a script that was created by Chryssa about which module worked sideways and which module worked up and down, and how all these things would essentially breathe together.
Just a little anecdote. You've all heard of Wrightwood Sign Company. Why? Because when you see their signs, it says Wrightwood Sign Company. When the sculpture showed up the first day and was unveiled, right on the bottom was the little tag that said Wrightwood Sign Company. We had to remake that module.
Me as an onlooker, I'm still amazed that 3,000 pounds times 4 hung from those slim wires, and I think that was the overall biggest challenge that was met that I visually saw. 6, sorry. So that's 18,000 pounds.
18,000 pounds.
Sonia, didn't you say at one point that she would talk about them as like Mustangs hanging from the ceiling?
I heard that. She didn't actually say it to me, but I think Chryssa herself was awed and very happy. This connected her to Chicago even more. That there were people that were willing to solve these issues to build something, a piece of artwork like that.
Yeah, just keep in mind, I said it, a bit in the documentary that, this was challenging for her. She was, Sonia said she had angst about this all the time, because normally you can kind of hold what you're doing. I mean, as you see the work that is on display, for the most part, other than the New York one, I mean, you can physically kind of put your arms around it, you can hold it, you can see it, you can see the scale, you can judge its artistic nature, you can make adjustments. This thing, 6 things hanging in this space, you could never really feel it. I mean, we did these early computer models that are in the exhibit that show it in drawing form, but drawing form's one thing. Seeing it in reality was kind of mind-blowing when it was finally unveiled.
Yeah. First question, just yes or no. Is there any video of it being lit?
I'm going to say no.
It probably would have made the documentary if it was. And then my other question is, you know, SOM was pretty much in the forefront of having contemporary artists of the time make this integral piece of art for a building, but now it seems like some of those artists have become so valuable that the artwork is almost worth more than it being in the place where it was originally intended. Do you see that becoming a problem in the future where where they're just going to start removing art from these buildings because it's just too valuable to stay in a lobby?
Well, I think that was certainly the case with the Henry Moore. I mean, you can't, it's a funny answer to your question. On one hand, yes, that can be an issue, but on the other hand, some owners just trash it. You know, so the Chryssa was trashed. The Tony Smith was trashed. I mean, the Tony Smith could be worth millions and millions, but, you know, somebody thought it was a piece of junk. So it's a complicated answer to your question. But, yeah, I mean, that can be an issue. But then it comes down to, you know, what's your where are your values? And if you buy a building that has one of these things, where are your values?
Question, the three of you were there when the United Airlines terminal must have been being developed, Murphy, Jan, in 1987, if I've checked correctly here. The incredible neon sculpture in the tunnel at United, was there any linkage, any texture, any fabric, any tubular, intellectually or otherwise, between Chryssa and that project?
There was not. I don't know. Maybe Helmut was influenced by. I don't know, but there was no connection.
I do just want to call attention to a special guest that we have in our audience here today, Bob, Bob, Robert, I don't know what you prefer, but he actually was one of the later fabricators for Chryssa's work. Do you mind maybe saying something? I know that. I know. Oh, go ahead.
I could just speak. Okay. My name is Bob Tatern, and I was a high school shop teacher. And I worked with Chryssa for the last 5 years here in Chicago. I helped build all of her sculptures. We built 3 very large ones, 8 smaller ones, and hundreds of shapes cut out of aluminum. And I met all 3 of these people 35 or 40 years ago up in SOM, and Brigitte, I met her many times, but I was the metal worker who made all her stuff back and forth to New York. She would come to Chicago and then come to my studio, and they were big pieces, and it was very interesting. I had no idea who she was when I first met her at all, but she was very determined and very aggressive, and I think at this time in her life, she was a little more give and take, because in New York, the metal people, they just didn't want to deal with it anymore. So when she came to Chicago, I enjoyed working with her. I had my own design studio, along with being a shop teacher, and so I enjoyed working with her. But it was difficult. After 5 years, I was done. Oh yes, and Helmut Jan came to our studio and looked at the pieces we had. It was a 4-car garage full of sculpture, 3 big ones, 8 little ones, and hundreds of little things. And he would come in and critique the sculpture and give her ideas and give me ideas on how to change bracketing, how to make the bracketing invisible, what kind of nuts and bolts to use. But I think what these people said, it takes a village to build one of these things. And at the end, the last 5 years, it was her and me, and it was kind of fun. Yes?
Could you say what years you worked with her?
Oh, it was 5 years, probably from 98 to 2000, or 80. Yeah, it's a long time ago, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I think it was just because I had the pleasure of looking through some of Robert's archival materials, and I think it was just roughly 85 through maybe 1990-ish.
Okay. But when I have all my files, being a former high school teacher, I keep everything. And I never in my life thought I would end up with all of her sketches and letters. I mean, I have dozens of her sketches and pulled them out, and it's very cool to see her notes and her signatures and your names on a lot of the things. And so it was an excitement to be invited to see this after all these years, after 35 years. I never in my life thought I would be hearing the name Chryssa again, but here we go. And okay.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. All right. Well, I think maybe we have time for just one more question if anyone has anything to follow that up with. Okay.
Well, actually, it won't be a question, but just a compliment. I'd like to thank Wrightwood 609 for really putting this on, bringing our attention to it. I worked at 33 West Monroe pre-pandemic for a few years, and I'll admit, I hadn't had to think of the multi-atrium concept of that building, and again, until now. I worked on one of the upper floors and had to transfer elevators, and it was interesting having to go to quote, social events and their, quote, outside spaces in one of those upper atriums where it's outdoors but still indoors. And I'd never really had to look up when I'd enter the building or look in those atriums. And the few times I did, it's just this kind of yawing chasm. And thinking of what could have been up there just really puts this into perspective. So thank you.
All right, and I guess that's it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. If you haven't had a chance to look through our exhibition, Chryssa in New York, it's on view still through July 27th. So even if you have had the chance to briefly look at it today, come and spend more time with it. There's always something new that you can see. And thank you all again. And thank you to all of our speakers, Sonia, David, Richard, Bob, all of you for joining us today. Thank you.